Let's open a word of prayer. Father, we thank you for this day. We pray that you'll bless our time together. Pray you'll help us to be good men and women like the sons of Issachar that understood the times in which they were living. We just pray that you will give us confidence to stand in an increasingly dark and evil day. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, that's for an upbeat start. It really is. I don't know how to, if I could sugarcoat it, I would, but I have to speak what I think I'm being led to talk about. So today I'm going to title it, You Better Believe It. Now, there's a reason for that, and I'll explain that. I'll get to that fairly early on. So we'll look at some of the things that are going on today. Just a reminder that we're on different platforms. We haven't been banned yet. Some people will say, well, you're not trying hard enough. So Vimeo, Remnant Truth Network, Blog Talk Radio is a audio podcast, and then Rumble, Real FBC. And those, you can find those. I think it's a little easier to find the Rumble channel now. We also stream live on Facebook and YouTube, and also on live stream. There's a link on our fbchapel.com homepage, and you can look at that. So each week we talk about the convergence of the signs, all the things that that happened before that are starting to be put together to happen again. And that's the way Jewish prophecy works, is that it's sort of a recapitulation. It's a pattern. It just doesn't happen one time and say, okay, that's it, we don't have to worry about it anymore. But there's a pattern to that. And it's sometimes hard for us that grew up in the West to understand that that's how they think. But again, for 10 years now, I've been using this world disrupted, and I guess until that slide wears out, I'm going to continue to use it because it really is a disruptive world. And I'm not even going to get to a lot of things today that I just don't have time. So I might throw in a few things, but I was sitting there when I prepare, I use the internet and that type of thing, and I'll look and I'll have 3 different browsers open, and some of the browsers will have 42 tabs or more open. So, and that happens very, very quickly. So I'll close them all down, to save video memory on my computer, and go back, and 10 minutes later, there are 42 tabs on some of the browsers. Well, this is Passover week. This is an article in Israel Hayom newspaper on Friday. One of the things I like to share with you are archaeological discoveries. And this is not by any means a new discovery, but it was one that got a 2-page spread in the paper, and I thought it was important enough to talk about. Although this newspaper can be a little bit difficult. It's in Hebrew, and sometimes getting from the Hebrew to the online article and getting it translated through some of the translation services out there can be a bit frustrating, and it can take a while. But let me share a little bit with you about this. Now, this is Passover week, very important date on the Jewish calendar, very important day for Christians, because of what Jesus did for us at that time. But this is an interesting story. Now, one of the criticisms of the Bible is that stories like the Exodus, other stories, don't really have good, solid archaeological or historical proof that they happened. Now, usually that's said by people who just haven't examined the archaeological record. And the archaeological record continues to be developed. They continue to make discoveries. And virtually every one of those discoveries verifies the truth of the Bible. Now, what happens sometimes in archaeology, Kathleen Kenyon is an example. She did this great excavation at Jericho I remember taking a class on biblical archaeology. Well, it's getting close to 50 years ago now. But it was a very important class for me because it helped me believe and it helped reaffirm my faith in the inerrancy of Scripture and the truth of what was told in the Bible. Kathleen Kenyon had excavated at Jericho. She'd done some tremendous drawings about what she excavated. And part of the reason it's good to have those drawings because what happens is that when they expose a site, it does, even down in the Judean wilderness, it rains occasionally. So at Jericho, what they found was they found a lower wide stone wall, and then they had a brick wall that was built high above it. Well, it's mud brick wall. And so what happens when rain falls on a mud brick wall, it turns to mud. So a lot of these sites that you will see, sometimes they build covers over them, but if they don't, they have to excavate, make charts and photographs and drawings and that sort of thing so that people can understand what was there, because the mud bricks are not going to stay. But she found the mud brick walls. They had collapsed all of them out, all the way around this essentially oval-shaped city. They said, well, it was an earthquake. Well, now, look, in an earthquake, they're not all going to fall this way. And they did everywhere around the town, and she said that, but then later, she became very pro-Palestinian, bought into that narrative. My archaeology professor in college had said she's going to change her story, and she did. And it's been very effective. You can sit there at Jericho, and I think I've mentioned this many times. You can watch bus after bus after bus after bus of Christians come through there, and they never walk 50 yards out onto this great archaeological site because they've been convinced that this is not the archaeological site. So this is about Passover. So the Exodus, they say there's no evidence or proof of the Exodus, but I think there's some things that are coming out, the patterns of evidence. Ryan Morrow, Joel Richardson, some others have done some things going down to what I believe also is the real Mount Sinai is in Saudi Arabia. That's being open right now because it's near Neom, and Mohammed bin Salman wants to push tourism and get more people there. If you look around that mountain, there is a very in that area, there are some drawings that appear to be a golden calf. There's what appears to be an altar, a split rock that gave out water, that sort of thing. And this is another one of those stories. So they say, well, there's no evidence of Passover, but this is a story that was told in the early days as they were, even before they were a country. So this is what the article says. The United Nations Commission of Inquiry, which arrived in Israel in 1947 with the aim of examining and proposing its future political plan, heard from David Ben-Gurion one of the most brilliant speeches of his life. To illustrate the continuity of Jewish history, the inseparable connection between the Jewish people and their homeland, and the ancient right of the Jews to the land, Ben-Gurion chose to compare the memory of the ship Mayflower, with which the first settlers from England arrived in America, really, literally 400 years ago now. Only about 300 years have passed since the Mayflower voyage, Ben-Gurion wondered to his guest, and there are almost no Americans who know how the voyage went, how many passengers were on board, and what bread they ate. On the other hand, even though the exodus from Egypt is more than 3,300 years away, there is no Jew in the whole world who does not know exactly what day the Jews set out on, what they went through on the way, and what they ate. We commemorate the exodus of the people from slavery in Egypt back to the land of Israel. Ben-Gurion's speech and the concluding words from the Haggadah, Sha'abdi, next year are free, Shatah Hakah, next year in Jerusalem, made an impression on the members of the delegation, most of whom were proficient in biblical text. That's kind of interesting that the people from the UN these international organizations back then understood the Bible. So what Ben-Gurion said then was, we didn't have much knowledge of our history here in America certainly compared to the Jews. Now, even in the evangelical church, I'll show you a couple examples here shortly, we don't really have a lot of connection to the truth of the Word of God. That's why I like archaeology, because I think it's one of those things that bring us back to the roots and truth of the Bible. However, the impression that Ben Gurion made could probably have been intensified if they had known of the existence of an ancient papyrus, which is the earliest extra-biblical proof of the Jewish holiday of freedom. This papyrus was discovered in the late 19th century in excavations on the small island of Yav in the Nile River in southern Egypt, and was associated with the ivory trade near Elephantine Island, the Elephant Island. Jews, and according to one of the most intriguing hypotheses from which the Ethiopian Jewish community later grew, after the destruction of the first temple in the Babylonian exile, the kingdom of Persia rose to greatness and took over the entire ancient Near East, including the land of Israel and Egypt. Jewish soldiers stationed in the Persian army between Egypt and Nubia, Sudan to the south, they left behind a collection of papyruses and potsherds documenting various aspects of their lives. The Passover letter, which dates to 419 BC, is one of the fascinating findings of Passover. So there you have an example of extra biblical writings confirming the truth of what's in the Bible. I've mentioned you can go to the British Museum in Jerusalem and you can see the Sennacherib cylinder. You can see the Amarna letters, which were written by, I'll call him the king of Shechem, to the Pharaoh of Egypt, saying, hey, we are being overrun here in the mountains by these Haparu people. Please help. And there were about 60 letters exchanged. They're little cuneiform writing on rocks they look like rocks you can hold in your hand. And of course, who were the Haparu people? They were the Hebrews that were there taking over the land that God had promised to them. Now, I did a little research. I love timelines. So I found this on Bible Gateway. I'm not going to vouch for every line in the timeline. This was, as they acknowledged, we're not even going to vouch for it ourselves. This is a compilation of what biblical scholars believe. And it is a timeline of Passion Week, which we are in. This is Palm Sunday. And it's very interesting. There is a tremendous amount of things that are crammed into that week. About 60% of the prophecies related to the first coming of Jesus are fulfilled in this week to the letter. Psalm 22, Isaiah 53, et cetera, et cetera. Things that, when they were written hundreds of years, even a millennium, almost a millennium before the time of Christ, they discussed crucifixion, which was not practiced in that area. But then it was because of the Romans at the time of Christ. So here is, I split this down into two parts. So here is the first part of the week. And you can see it has all the passage, the references. You can, again, if you look for, I think it's Passion Week Bible Timeline, search at BibleGateway.com, you will be able to find this and download it in a PDF form. And then this is the events of the last half of the week. And one of the interesting things is, and I'll have to give credit to another pastor whose name I do not recall at the time, but he made a very good point. I saw a video of his that he did. He said, Jesus had the triumphant entry on Sunday, and on Tuesday, Wednesday, he was out on the Mount of Olives giving the doomsday message about the end of the world and the end of the age to his disciples. So he went from triumph to this message is, and he said, you can read the passages, Matthew 23 and 24. He wept over Jerusalem and said, you know, if you only knew the time that you lived in. There was another time when he told his disciples that the holy prophets and men of old longed to see the day that you are seeing right here in front of you. And I think we're at the time where we should be grateful that we live in the time that we do, as difficult as it is, as we see things go on. So again, just to briefly recap, what he warns us about more than anything else in these passages, and I'll just read a few verses from Matthew chapter 24, is deception. Matthew 24:4, and Jesus answered and said unto them, take heed that no man deceive you. For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. And many false prophets shall arise, and shall deceive many. And because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. And this theme of deception is carried through the New Testament. When Paul met with the Ephesian elders, because he couldn't go see them in Ephesus, he warned them, there's some from your own flock that are going to depart from the faith. When he wrote some of his last writings in 2 Timothy chapter 3 and 4, he warned about a departure from the faith. When he wrote 2 Thessalonians 2, he wrote about a departure from the faith. So it's a common theme that we should be aware of, and particularly aware of as we get closer to the end of the age. It is true that there's always been apostasy and departure from the faith. I mean, it doesn't take long to read through even a summary of church history to find out that this has been a major problem all the way. But that final apostasy that's talked about in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 3, that's a different character, because that leads to the revealing of the man of sin. And as I've often likened it to, the apostasy bucket is filling up. And at some point it will overflow. And that's the difference of this apostasy from the ones that have gone on before. Always a problem, but the last one is really bad. And that's the one I think we're on the verge of. Now, just a few examples from the church. I have not, as you know, I have not had much respect or good things to say about Hillsong. Their pastor in Hillsong, New York, recently resigned. I saw the Hillsong, I think London was doing a thing, and they had it looked like that Hindu statue with the many hands, the way they were doing their dance routine or whatever. And here's Brian Houston. He talks in there about, I have ADHD, but God has blessed me. They note that the church brings in something like $95 million a year, that the conferences for the young people bring in around $8.8 million in 2019 for 20 to 34-year-olds. Global attendance of 150,000 weekly. And he goes, but I don't know if I'm an entrepreneur, he says. I'm a pastor, a humble pastor. But I do know distraction is not hard for me to get caught up in. Now listen, I think if you have to tell people you're humble, that's sort of the indication that maybe you're not. Now, another pastor that I've talked about a number of times that sort of has the fingernails on a chalkboard quality is Andy Stanley from North Point in Atlanta. I did a talk in England. You can find it online, I'm sure, on YouTube, called The Silence of the Shepherds. And I've done I've mentioned him many times in my updates here about some of the things that he says that are just, they're hard to believe that he says them. And I always get asked the question, well, I'm sure his daddy doesn't know, does he? Yeah, he does, because he invites him to go speak on his cruises every year. He knows exactly what he's saying. And I'm willing to exercise a little bit of grace with someone calling out their own child. By the way, Andy Stanley's not a young guy. I think he's 62. But he can still wear skinny jeans, bless his heart. You know, I've threatened to do that myself, but I don't know that there's enough lycra on the planet to allow that to happen. But this week he tweeted, and I checked this morning, I thought I had a screenshot of it, and I couldn't find it. I did find it eventually, but the tweet has been removed. But this is what he tweeted the other day. Christianity that has been reduced to merely believing things is a counterfeit Christianity. Now, he says these things, and I always want to say when he says these things, Andy, do you believe that? You understand how absurd what he's saying is? He did a book, I can't remember the title of it, unhitching from the, he talks about unhitching from the Old Testament. And that, the disciples, they didn't really even need, they just believed what they saw. Well, but they told everybody to study the scriptures, the Old Testament scriptures, to learn about Jesus and the prophecies and who he was. So I pulled out a few more tweets of his just to sort of show the absurd nature of this tweet. Christianity has been reduced to merely believing things as a counterfeit Christianity. He said this, a faith that doesn't do anybody any good isn't any good. To which I would again ask, do you believe that? Are we supposed to believe you when you say that? When it comes to vision, he's big on vision and conferences, catalyst conferences. Incomplete and memorable is better than complete and forgettable because memorable is portable. Okay, you can exegete that and unpack that and see if you can understand what it is that he means. Leadership is complicated. You want to get it right? I can help. The Andy Stanley Leadership Podcast is designed to help leaders go further, faster, across the full library of episodes and application guides here. Because why? What does Andy want? He wants you to believe what he says. This is absurd. He has a new book out, Better Decisions, Fewer Regrets. He tweeted today or yesterday about the cruelty is apostasy, an article by David French, who writes some things that I like, but I also think at times he's, the kind thing I will say he's a bit of a crank. But he was talking about, everybody was so cruel that, Beth Moore had to leave the Southern Baptist. Go look up then I do a talk last year on ecumenism, and I showed what Beth Moore was saying about joining up with Rome, that sort of thing, back in 2014. So she didn't leave the Southern Baptist. In fact, I saw one of the Southern Baptist seminary presidents talking about critical race theory and saying that, we should be sensitive and think about these things. It's a mess there. There needs to be another split in the Southern Baptist. And either the bad people need to leave or the good people need to leave. But Beth Moore, she just couldn't take it anymore. She did not like President Trump, which is not uncommon, as you probably know if you pay attention. But she has major theological issues. I think she has gotten worse over the years. But in terms of belief, listen to this from Matthew chapter 8. When Jesus was come down from the mountain, great multitudes followed him. And behold, there came a leper and worshipped him, saying, Lord, if thou wilt, thou canst make me clean. Well, it seemed if he had belief, faith. I don't know how you separate the two. And Jesus put forth his hand and touched him, saying, I will, be thou clean. And immediately his leprosy was cleansed. And Jesus saith unto him, see that thou tell no man, but go thy way, show thyself to the priest, and offer the gift that Moses commanded for a testimony unto them. And when Jesus was entered into Capernaum, there came unto him a centurion beseeching him, and saying, Lord, my servant lieth at home sick of the palsy, grievously tormented. And Jesus saith unto him, I will come and heal him. The centurion answered and said, Lord, I am not worthy that thou shouldst come under my roof, but speak the word only, and my servant shall be healed. For I am a man under authority, having soldiers go under me, and I say to this man, go, and he goeth, and to another, come, and he cometh, and to my servant, do this, and he doeth it. And when Jesus heard it, he marveled and said unto them that followed, verily I say unto you, I have not found so great faith, no, not in Israel. This week, the Pope tweeted this: Mary was and is present in these days of the pandemic, near to the people who unfortunately have concluded their earthly journey all alone, without the comfort of the closeness of their loved ones. Mary is always there next to us with her maternal tenderness. Mary is not only the bridge joining us to God, she is more. She is the road that God traveled to reach us and the road that we must travel in order to reach him. This is what the biblical Mary said in Luke chapter 1. And Mary said, my soul doth magnify the Lord, and my spirit hath rejoiced in God my Savior. For he hath regarded the low estate of his handmaiden. For behold, from henceforth all generations shall call me blessed. For he that is mighty hath done to me great things, and holy is his name, and his mercy is on them that fear from generation to generation. He has showed strength with his arm. He has scattered the proud in their imagination of their hearts. He hath put down the mighty from their seats and exalted them of low degree. He hath filled the hungry with good things, and the rich he hath sent empty away. He hath helped his servant Israel in remembrance of his mercy, as he spake to our fathers, to Abraham, and to his seed forever. That's what the real Mary said. Not the one, I keep thinking of the Pope when he was in Bethlehem in 2014 or 15, where the Mary there with the baby Jesus and a Palestinian Khalifa, Joseph wearing a Khalifa and she wearing what looked like a burqa. They appropriated her. That, by the way, that's cultural appropriation. And that's unbiblical and it's blasphemous. And the Pope didn't have a problem going and doing his mass in front of that. Well, let's look at some of the things that are going on in the world today. Here's an article in the Washington Post. Social justice for toddlers. These new books and programs start the conversation early. I do understand why. It's still, I watch and it's hard to believe that people have lost their minds. And they have jobs, good paying ones for, formerly well-respected newspapers. Here's some of the books that they recommend in this article, that they say, isn't this wonderful that these people are, it says, in the era of Black Lives Matter and Me Too, many parents are wondering when the right time is to talk to their children about social justice. Experts say it's never too early, and a new wave of tools and resources can help start the conversation. And here's some of them. Anti-racist baby. Woke baby. They also recommend this Liberate Dead, a collective at the intersection of social and emotional learning, racial justice and healing. And then Faye and Fluffy's story time reading is fundamental. They're drag queens. I think they're in Toronto. And they actually have this book that they published, Not Quite Narwhal. And it's a book about, unicorns and, he doesn't fit in and he's not this and he's not that. They have these, somebody else did a limited edition run that they sold out of. These things like the Black Box, the LGBT, 2SQ plus Families Box, the Gender Expansive Box, the Indigenous Box, the Black Box, the Gender Expansive Box. I mean, it's insane. Here's from one of the other websites they recommend, Raise Good People. And do you see what everything is? It's not a traditional family. Here's another family. So everybody's woke. This is about a 6-minute clip. I tried to break it down, but I think this is worth listening to. This is Tucker Carlson the other night talking about our woke military.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Here's an amazing story. Yesterday, the Pentagon's Special Operations Command made an announcement from its official Twitter account. Special Operations Command is a very significant thing in the U.S. military and in our country. It oversees Delta Force, the SEAL teams, and the rest of our most celebrated, best trained, most lethal warfighters. So the tweet announced that a man called Richard Torres Estrada is now the, quote, Chief of Diversity and Inclusion of America's Special Forces, and they included his picture with the announcement. Then, at the very top of its website, the Special Operations Command included a link to its extensive, it's quite long, new Diversity and Inclusion Strategic Plan. Now, the one thing we know about that plan is that it will result in the dramatic lowering of standards within our elite ranks. It probably already has. So how will that make America safer? Well, the generals never said you couldn't find that on the website. Instead, they told us that, quote, all of us understand that diversity and inclusion are operational imperatives. They didn't say how, they just said they're imperatives. So this is the initiative that Richard Torres Estrada will be running. So the question is, who exactly is Richard Torres Estrada? Well, his Facebook page gives some indication of who he is. On it, you will find an attack on the police as racists. You'll find crude BLM propaganda. You will find a photograph of Donald Trump holding a Bible in front of a church. Next to Trump is a photograph of Adolf Hitler. The point is, they're the same. So this is the guy who now oversees hiring for the Navy SEALs. If you're wondering whether our military leadership has gone woke, you can consider that question settled for good. The Pentagon is now the Yale Faculty Lounge, but with cruise missiles. And that should concern you. Meanwhile, the rest of the world rolls on and gets more menacing by the day. Tonight, for example, the Suez Canal, one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world, is blocked by a stranded container ship. Was it an accident? Maybe, maybe not. We don't know. What we do know is that the Suez Canal is vital to the world's economy. That's not an overstatement. The Suez Canal is one of only about a dozen strategic choke points that control virtually all global trade, and now it's closed. So this is a challenge to America's critical national interests. How is the Pentagon responding to that? Well, they're occupied with other things right now. For the last month, the entire U.S. military has been operating under a so-called stand-down order. That was issued by the new Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, the defense contractor, now running the military. Lloyd Austin believes the real threat to America is not the Chinese government or paralyzed global trade. The real threat to this country is people who didn't vote for Joe Biden. Watch.
And if confirmed, I will fight hard to stamp out sexual assault and to rid our ranks of racists and extremists. The job of the Department of Defense is to keep America safe from our enemies. But we can't do that if some of those enemies lie within our own ranks.
So Republicans voted to confirm him. He is himself an extremist. And they have said virtually nothing about Lloyd Austin since because they're paralyzed. They're paralyzed because Lloyd Austin has no problem calling his opponents racist immediately, ridding our ranks of racists and extremists. The key question is, how does Lloyd Austin define a racist or an extremist? The definition matters. This show has been denounced as a dangerous white supremacist organ for the crime of reading Martin Luther King quotes on the air. So it's worth finding out what those words mean. But Lloyd Austin doesn't provide a definition. And that's not accidental, because what you're seeing is not an attempt to make the military better. What you're seeing is a political purge of the military. Consider what has been happening during the military's training on, quote, extremism. A lot of enlisted soldiers have asked a pretty basic question. Hey, wait a minute. Weren't the BLM and Antifa rioters this summer extremists? Seems like they were. They murdered people. They murdered a lot more people than died at the Capitol on January 6th. A lot more. They burned businesses. They wrecked cities. In some places, it took the National Guard to stop them. So why aren't these people, quote, extremists? Good question. Well, a man called Ramon Colon Lopez was called in to explain why, to tell the troops why they were wrong. Colon Lopez is the senior enlisted advisor to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. These questions, he conceded, are, quote, coming from every echelon that we're talking to. Some people may think, All right, so the events of 6th of January happened. How come you're not looking at the situation that was going on in Seattle prior to that? Well, yeah, exactly. Kind of an obvious question. Well, Ramon Colon Lopez has an answer. Actually, it's more of a threat. Quote, I am concerned about the way that some people are looking at the current environment and what they are thinking they can do and act upon based upon their personal beliefs. Oh, in other words, if you ask questions like these obvious questions, you are by definition dangerous. Colon Lopez said he was working hard to, quote, make sure that military members understand the difference between Seattle and Washington, D.C. All right, what are those differences exactly? Well, here's one. BLM, Colon Lopez explained, is a, quote, social injustice organization, and therefore it's not extreme. Also, quote, when the military called upon us to go ahead and support an effort in Washington, we did. We never got called for the law enforcement issue that was happening in Seattle. Oh, so the mayor of Seattle never called the National Guard to put down Antifa, therefore Antifa is not an extremist organization. Well, that's ludicrous, obviously. In fact, it's not even true. Actually, the National Guard did deploy to Seattle during the riots last summer, but whatever. Colon Lopez's job isn't to make sense, it's to send a political message from the Joe Biden administration. We're in charge now. This week, we spoke to a DEA agent who was fired for being in Washington on January 6th. He didn't riot. He never even went into the Capitol building. In fact, he defended the cops outside against the rioters. He's on video doing that, but it didn't matter. He didn't vote for Joe Biden, so he's gone. And he's hardly alone. Earlier this month, the FBI arrested a man from Oklahoma called Anthony Alfred Griffith. According to the FBI, here's Anthony Alfred Griffith's crime.
This is what they said.
He walked into the Capitol
documents.
building, through open doors, and took pictures. Then he handed those pictures to federal investigators. Here's the FBI's criminal complaint against Griffith. It accuses him, quote, of witnessing multiple people trying to break down a door. Oh, he saw it happen. So for the crime of witnessing other people of trying to break down a door, Anthony Alfred Griffith now faces 7 years in prison. But don't worry, people like Anthony Alfred Griffith, our leaders tell us, are extremists, they're white supremacists, and our military needs to be laser focused on making certain that no one who votes like these people do can ever serve in the armed forces again.
We absolutely need to look at any type of white supremacists that are still members of the military and how they're being targeted for recruitment by white supremacist groups. And we need to weed this out. This whole idea of police officer on police officer violence with those officers who have been turned by white extremists is really scary to me. And I know it's got to be scary for the other police officers.
I am considering legislation to create a standalone punitive article in the Uniform Code of Military Justice to address violent extremism in the ranks and to send a message of deterrence that this kind of conduct will not be tolerated in the military.
It's really an amazing clip. The first two people you saw speaking, Hirono and Duckworth, are extremists. They're the most extreme members of the U.S. Senate. They went on television this week to tell us that people with the wrong skin color couldn't be hired for federal jobs. Did anyone at the Capitol on January 6th call for that? Not one person that we're aware of, and we denounced it immediately. So they're extremists by definition, and they're lecturing us about extremism. The military has to do more to address extremism. And in a way, they're doing that by aggressively promoting extremism. Every 2 months, senior enlisted leaders in the military gather for something called the Commanding General Stewardship of the Army Profession Forum. In January, that forum included a, quote, professional dialogue on the racist hate tract, White Fragility, written by lunatic Robin DiAngelo. No one condemned Robin DiAngelo's obvious extremism. They celebrated it. Just last month, someone called Lieutenant General Brad Webb, the commander of the Air Force Education and Training Command, made it very explicit. He acknowledged that the Air Force was recruiting candidates with a private pilot's license. Now, that might seem like a wise course. Flying planes is what the Air Force does. But to Lieutenant General Brad Webb, no, that's systemic racism.
One of the other areas in line with that has been aptitude tests.
Yes, sir.
And in fact, the chief mentioned that one as well in his talk the other day. But we are deep underway in updating pilot tests and also officer qualification tests that at its root, you get a weighted score if you have a private pilot's license. Well, that's a socioeconomic influencer. In other words, if you're rich enough to afford to have private pilot time, you can get a license. That ought not be, weighted
Right.
in such a way that you exclude, various ethnic groups.
So the real question is, how did a doughy moron like that end up with an important job in the military? This isn't the Department of Transportation. It's not the DMV. This is a serious thing. This is the federal agency to which we give the most money that exists to protect the rest of us from foreign threats. And guys like that have power? That guy's the commander of Air Force education. And it's not just him. In October, the head of the Air Force recruiting office, Major General Ed Thomas, published a piece on Yahoo called 86% of Air Force pilots are white men. Here's why that needs to change. So you read this and you've got to wonder what the families of the thousands of American white pilots who have died defending this country over the last 100 years thought of that. Ed Thomas wants them to know that their husbands and fathers and sons shouldn't have been flying planes in the first place because they were the wrong color. Pretty remarkable. We actually called Ed Thomas after his piece came out to ask about this. He was kind enough to talk to us. Had a long conversation. He never explained the only thing that matters, how his race mongering makes this country safer. He obviously didn't care. Clearly hadn't even thought about it. How did someone like that get power in the U.S. military? There are a lot of generals like that.
Well, that goes on. And what you'll find, too, with regard to the Capitol thing on January 6th, the prosecutors are getting hammered by the judges because they're not coming up with... look, there's some people that really need to be prosecuted. But there are a number of other people where the prosecutors are coming into court and acknowledging, the doors were open and the cops sort of told them to come on in. Well, what do you do with that? And this about that they planned this. The judges are reconsidering bail decisions they made or decisions not to allow bail, keep people in prison for months and months and months, pending trial. The whole thing just, to me, seems to be a bit out of control. This is another troubling thing. This is Governor Kristi Noem of South Dakota. There was the South Dakota legislature enacted a law that said men who claiming to be women, transgender, I don't even know if you call them transgender men or do you call them transgender women or whatever. What you call those generals, by the way, that Tucker was talking about, they're transitioning to wimpdom. They're so woke. They're wet noodles. This is what Obama did. He purged the military. I receive information from military people, slides from presentations of education sessions they have to attend that are pushing this stuff on them. These are good, solid military people. I have a very good friend. He's a white guy. He spent 6 years in a 9x9 cell with another guy at the Hanoi Hilton. Tell me that he was there because of his privilege. He earned his way to the Air Force Academy. This stuff sickens me. This is demonic at its core. This is from the pit of hell. And Kristi Noem, she has a problem with the laws. She says, well, yeah, we can have that law for South Dakota high schools, but we can't do that for our universities. I think Tucker Carlson had her on the other night, and he was doing a pretty good job cross-examining her, and she was doing a pretty pathetic job defending her position. The NCAA might make it difficult for our athletes to compete in sports. And then you see this, the soccer player, what's her name? Rapinoe? She's all over the place. Oh, I don't make as much money as the men. No offense. You're very, very good. She's an incredibly talented athlete. But nobody really watches you. Your family and friends and people at your school and stuff. But, they're complaining about NCAA basketball disparities. Well, the men's tournament gets $1 bazillion. The women's tournament does not get the ratings. Not because they hate women, it's just that there's more money in men's sports. So, maybe the solution is just have one team. One of the greatest female athletes of all times was Florence Griffith Joyner. Remember her? She set world records back in the 80s that still stand. Last year, there were over a dozen, if not a couple dozen or more, maybe dozens of high school boys who ran faster than she ever did. That's because men and women are basically different. And she's like the greatest woman athlete of all time. And I'm not denigrating her. She was phenomenal, multi-talented, graceful, everything, strong. But and so now here's Kristi Noem, who everybody say, oh, she's this great conservative. She's gonna rise to. Well, unless she gets her act together, I hope not. Here's an article from NBC. Is that clock right? Is somebody moving that forward? Springing forward? 2 minutes fast. It's 2 minutes fast, okay. I wonder where that 2 minutes went. DHS weighing major changes to fight domestic violence and extremism, say officials. You know where that's going to go. Jack Phillips, the baker who won in the Supreme Court, pretty much won everything. He's back in court now. The day of his decision, somebody came in and ordered a transgender cake, and he said no, and now he's back in court defending that. Why? Because we can destroy him. We can destroy his business. I've been in his shop. It's a beautiful, beautiful shop. Biden is appointing a speech squelcher to some office. He thinks it's like we need to rethink the First Amendment. Now I'm going to do this. This is a very short clip. I want you to listen to the question that's asked at the Biden's first. Well, I wouldn't call it a press conference. He had like a cheat sheet, pictures of people, who to call. I'm telling you, folks, we are in so much trouble. What do you think Putin and Xi of Russia and Xi of China are thinking about this? They're laughing. In fact, when they had the big thing in Anchorage, Communist China came out and said, you people are killing your black people on the streets. Your country's falling apart. Guess what? All the Black Lives Matter groups are communists. They admit it. It's what Stalin used to do. It's like Russian propaganda. They're turning it on us. Listen to the question in the way that's asked by this reporter from NPR, National People's Radio. Goodness. Here we go.
Thanks so much, Mr. President. You've said over and over again that immigrants shouldn't come to this country right now. This isn't the time to come. That message is not being received. Instead, the perception of you that got you elected as a moral, decent man is the reason why a lot of immigrants are coming to this country and entrusting you with unaccompanied minors. How do you resolve that tension? And how are you choosing which families can stay and which can go, given the fact that even though with Title 42, there are some families that are staying? And is there a timeline for when?
Okay. A great moral man, you wonderful dear leader. We are so impressed. Here's an editorial in the Wall Street Journal the other day. Western cultural elites are giving away Lenin's rope. You can go find it and look at it. It's by Gerald Baker. I think it was in Wednesday or Thursday's Wall Street Journal. And the saying used to be, and he starts off his article with the quote attributed to Lemelin, that the capitalists will sell us the rope with which we will hang them. And he says, you know what? It's worse than that. It is. They've completely lost. They're giving it away. They're completely capitulating to Red China. I would recommend Secure Freedom Radio with Frank Gaffney and Gordon Chang and Jeff Nyquist and Trevor Loudon. The communists are in control. We've had a revolution, whether you like it or not. Now, instead of saying that the capitalists will sell us the rope with which we'll hang them, now what China says is essentially this: we will lend you the money to buy the rope with which you will hang yourselves. And that's probably true. They're laughing at us. And listen, I think we are on the verge of war. This thing in Denver, of course, the shooting that took place the other day, one of the policemen that went in to try to stop things, a father of 7, was tragically killed, along with, I think, 9 other people at a King Soopers store. It's owned by Kroger. Immediately, there were tweets running around. This tweet from this one lady, it says, Julie DeCaro wrote a book. It's not a book you would really want to read. Extremely tired of people's lives depending on whether a white man with an AR-15 is having a good day or not. Oops. It's an Arab. And she goes, well, I meant, 99% of them are white men of all these mass shootings. And she never mentions all the shootings that take place in inner cities. It's insane. The store, by the way, advertises itself as your one-stop shop for kosher groceries. And the person that did that has quotes from the Quran and that sort of thing on his Facebook page, which was taken down, but I captured a bunch of the screenshots before they did, because I knew he's from Syria. Family moved a lot. Currently lives in a 7-bedroom home. Pretty rough. Oppressive. But he drove about 25 miles to this store that advertises itself as selling kosher food. You do the math. In Oakland, they're going to give $500, or I think it's $500 a month to disadvantaged black families. If you're white, don't bother applying. It said that. It says that in the rules. This is an interesting thing. The interest rates in Europe have fallen so low that some people have mortgages where the interest rate has gone negative. That means they get a check from the bank every month because they have a mortgage. I know it's hard to kind of wrap your head around that. This is the world that we live in. Real quick, just a couple things. I don't talk a lot about the vaccine. There are plenty, believe me, I know everybody's got access to videos because I get about 100 every few days. And people are having bad reactions to it sometimes. Some none. I've got a number of friends that have taken it, some none. But others, a young lady in about 40, 45, she, both of the shots she had had COVID last fall. She was like, thought she was going to die. 104-degree temperature, flat on her back. Started about 5 hours after she got each shot. So it's a very difficult decision. So that's one that you're going to have to make on your own. By the way, we at FBC, we do not require vaccines, and we will not require vaccines, just so you know. This article from Bloomberg, we must start planning for a permanent pandemic. They recently put in restrictions back in England, where a lot of people have been vaccinated, that are going to be in lockdowns until September. enjoy your summer. That's what I said to one of my friends in England. Somebody in one of the higher ups, Lord something, I think he was in the House of Lords, said, this is probably going to go on for 10 years. In the Financial Times yesterday, they talked about that the virus jabs are at the sharp end of political risk, that it's actually kind of having the opposite effect, that they want less populism, but the pushing of the vaccines and the lockdowns creates populism, and the people in charge don't want. So there's people reacting to what's going on. There are massive protests everywhere you look, and there's problems in some places. I mean, I was reading about Brazil and Mexico this morning, and they can't dig the graves fast enough to bury people that are dying from this thing. That's a fact. It's happening. And Brazil's in terrible shape. If you work for Amazon, this is great. Amazon drivers must sign a biometric consent form or lose their job. So they put cameras in the van, and Amazon finally admitted, yeah, we do have pictures of video of drivers peeing in cans so they can get their jobs done. So they don't stop someplace, so they might get docked their pay. The COVID passes are coming. Here's the New York is saying they're rolling out a COVID pass. Open source computer people are trying to put it together. They're talking about, well, maybe we can do face scanning. That'll help. And that works great, if you've ever woke up in the morning like me and you use a certain machine to help you with a sleep issue. You pick up your phone. Face scan doesn't work. It says you have to enter that stupid code. So I guess, as long as you're not, and what if you're masked up? It's crazy. Here's a little thing from Amazon. This is what they're doing.
She uses lots of different cards and IDs to get through her day. What if all Zoe needed was herself? Introducing Amazon One, a free service that lets you use your palm to quickly pay for things, gain access, earn rewards, and more. Let's say you're grabbing your favorite coffee beverage, or heading into the office, or checking out. Just hover your palm and you're on your way. It's as easy as that. Sign up is free and takes less than a minute. All you need is a credit card, your phone number, and your palm. That's it. Since your palm is unique and can't be lost or misplaced, you can get things done quickly and securely. And with more experiences on the way, Amazon One will help you get even more done, simply by being you. Now, Zoe has more time to do what she loves, indoor skydiving. Enter, identify, and pay with Amazon One.
I'm sure it'll all work. And you can't lose or misplace your arm. Do they read about the Mexican cartels, what they do to people? Do they ever watch Criminal Minds or one of those crime shows? Okay, so that's coming. We know that there is this control system that's coming, and a lot of it's being put in place in many, many different levels. That's not the fulfillment of Bible prophecy, but we're on the road to the fulfillment of Bible prophecy. Well, here's this. This ship, it's not Evergreen, it's called it begins with a G. It's Ever something. All of their ships are named Ever, and then the next word begins with a G. And it's stuck in the Suez Canal. It's one of the largest container ships in the world. The Suez Canal has maybe 55,000 containers on ships. What's that? Ever Given. Thank you. And this ship can carry between 17 and 20,000 containers all by itself. The Suez Canal might have 55,000 containers transit the canal on a daily basis. This is disrupting the world trade. About, depending on which you read, 10, 13, 15% of world trade passes through the Suez Canal. and it's stuck. This thing is about a quarter mile long. It's like the Ark of container ships. It's 3 times longer than Noah's Ark would have been, I think. It's a big ship. And it's stuck, this backlog. There are now, it's in the part of the canal that's one way. You're either going north, it was going north through the canal, or you're going south through the canal. There are other parts of the canal where they have 2 lanes. This one, they never made a bigger lane because it just wasn't economically viable for the cost. And they're trying to dig us out. I mean, look at this giant equipment next to the hull of the ship. They don't know if the hull's damaged yet because they haven't been able to get the thing to move. They were able to move it just a little bit this morning. But there are logistics. So here's, it's sort of like, if you're going to mess up, make sure that what you do is invisible from space. That's sort of a good rule. It's okay to do bad things. There are hundreds of vessels now. It grows by about 15% a day. And there's no way to get around it. This thing is 200,000 tons, 20,000 containers. Here are the ships sitting around waiting, tankers, container ships. And I think a couple weeks ago I showed you a picture of the ships waiting offshore at Long Beach and Los Angeles port in Southern California. They have no place to anchor them because there's so much shipping going on right now that container prices have skyrocketed to ship something. And the ports can't handle the traffic. About 13% of the world's oil goes through the Suez Canal. There are some great apps. They're sort of like airplane apps for marine traffic. It shows you that like the blue dots are tankers, I think, and the red dots are container ships or vice versa. Here's what it looks like a little closer up to the thing. This thing is stuck here in the Suez Canal. And you can see the backup of ships south of there and north of there. And then that little green dot right here, that's the ship. These are tugs that are coming to get it. Seth Frantzman had a good article in the Jerusalem Post saying there's $5 billion of traffic northbound through the Suez Canal and about 4.5 billion a day southbound through the Suez Canal. Good article in the Jerusalem Post the other day. By the way, I like Seth Frantzman. I think he's a good analyst of what's going on in the Middle East in particular. I don't know how he writes like that. He happened to be here in Ohio this weekend, and I went over and spent a couple hours with him and had lunch with him on Friday. So that was an interesting time. Great conversation. And I'll talk about that. He's got a book coming out, and I'll be interviewing him a little bit about that on drones. But this is a major problem. Again, here's the backup of traffic. The alternative is to go down and go around the Cape of Good Hope. That adds about anywhere from 12 to 15 days to the transit, a lot of fuel. It adds several thousand, about 3,500 miles to the trip. It also exposes you to the Somali pirates in the Indian Ocean and other things in the storms at the Cape of Good Hope. 50 ships traverse the thing. This is a little video that somebody did about, there's a single canal, double canal. This is an engineer that said, I don't know if they're going to get this done anytime soon. Because he analyzes, says, look, it's down here in the single canal part. It's completely blocking it. It just happens to be the right size. 400 meters long, 200,000 tons. And then he goes through this formula, 45 feet deep below the water line. Same weight as 200,000 cars. So if you do this formula, You have to be able to move 33,000 tons of mass to get it loose. But there's a problem with that. This is the most powerful tugboat on the planet Earth, the Far Samson, and it's capable of moving 30,000 tons, right? No, it's capable of moving 420 tons. Which means to move this ship, you would need 80 Far Samsons there at the same time trying to fit in that channel. Not possible. And there aren't 80 Far Samsons on the planet. They have the most powerful tugs in the world on the way there. Some have already arrived. And then, okay, well, we'll dig it out. Well, we have to dig out away from the bank, which slopes down. We have to get down 45 feet to get under this. And here's the problem. We don't have a shovel that's long enough. Okay? Sand doesn't stand vertically. It just doesn't happen. Simple physics. And they have dredging machines, and they might be able to get out. But some people are very pessimistic about this. Now, Israel says, hey, we got that Red pipeline, a lot to Ashkelon. Come on over with your oil. We can take care of that. Piracy fear. So it's going to be a big problem. There's an article from Haaretz from about a week ago, Thinking Outside the Womb. They have created some of the tech science people there have created artificial wombs. In the upper right-hand corner, you can kind of see that's a lamb growing in an artificial womb from conception. Now, I haven't done it with humans yet. We wrote an article about it in 2015. We raised the possibility of creating an egg from a skin cell of a woman or a man. I've received numberless emails from women with fertility problems who are yearning to have a child and from homosexual men who are excited at the possibility. It can't be said that the possibility of growing a human fetus to full term is close, but it won't be long before less thrilling things happen. For example, the creation of an embryo without the need of an egg was formed in the ovary or a fetus whose parents are two men. So that's the technology that's being developed. There's also an election in Israel this week. This headline, the fifth election, that was the fourth in 2 years. They said the fifth election would be Israel's 11th plague, which is kind of interesting coming at the time of Passover. The election, I have all kinds of charts and graphs, but you don't need to see those. You just need to understand that right now it looks like the best Netanyahu could do. He needs 61 Knesset members. Right now, if everything went right for him, he would have 59. Now he's faced with a dilemma. Voting or bringing some of the Arab people who were elected under the Joint Arab List into the cabinet. But if he does that, some of the right-wing and Orthodox people in his coalition probably will take a hike. So right now, it looks like you got 30 Knesset members. The next highest one is 18. I don't think I'm talking out of school. I mentioned this to Seth in our conversation the other day and said, you guys have a mess. I said, I should be living where I live with divided government. By the way, the word this morning was that the holdout on changing the filibuster in the Senate is Joe Manchin of West Virginia. You may not believe this, but Joe Manchin's wife was appointed in the last 24 hours or so by Joe Biden, or the Biden, whoever's running that place down there, to a government commission that oversees like $165 million in aid to Appalachia. Now, that in some places that would be called bribery, but I guess it's okay. So it's a big mess. A lot of things going on with Israel and Iran. Iran attacked a couple Israeli ships in the Arab Sea and I think in the Persian Gulf this week. And of course, we know there was the Wall Street Journal article that said, hey, Israel's been attacking these ships. One of the Israeli generals, Tal Kalman, is one of the general staff's prudent intelligence generals. This is an article in Israel Hayom. He talked about the threats and the possible response, including the military, but also included a warning, avoiding dealing with problems in the state of Israel. He said, 2020 was a very good year in the struggle against Iran. I do not want to call it a year of turning, but it was a year of significant changes. It began with the assassination of Qasem Soleimani and continued with a sequence of things good things for the most part. Of course, I cannot comment, which caused the balance to be, why I consider the balance to be positive, even very positive. But he said, Iran is not giving up. This is a quote from him in the article, and this kind of gets lost a little bit in the translation. By the way, if you ever see an article like this at Israel Hayom or someplace else, an Arabic one, if you copy the URL in the address bar at the top and go to Google Chrome and paste it in the address bar, hit enter, it'll bring up the page in the foreign language, and then over at the right at the address bar, there's a little drop-down thing, and you click on that and you can translate it to English about that quick. So it's a wonderful tool. Anyway, he just says, listen, we're facing unprecedented challenges. This is quite a long article, but I would highly recommend that you get it at Israel Hayom, translated. He says the Iranian regime is interested in the nuclear thing, first and foremost, as an insurance policy for its stability. But for Israel, it is an existential issue, and also in another Middle East that will enter into a nuclear arms race in which Iran may join other countries that might want to acquire nuclear capabilities. Alongside this, Kalman is deeply concerned about Iran's conventional military buildup and also their buildup in missiles that have very accurate targeting capabilities. So this is an existential threat that Israel is facing. They're developing technologies to fight it, but it is a problem, and it's very tense. There are a number of things going on in the Middle East that I will finish up with here over the next 5 or 10 minutes. Here's some things, and you need to understand, we talk about Ezekiel 38 and 39 and what appears to be an Iran, Turkey, Russia coalition, in Libya thrown in, and some other people not participating. So just understand that things are happening that are increasing the chances of that happening. I don't think it's happening soon, but there are a lot of military equipment movements into Ukraine this week. Looks like war there might happen. This from the Tehran Times and other newspapers. Iran and China have finalized a 28-year comprehensive partnership. I'll talk a little bit more about that this next week. But Iran, a few months ago, I did a thing from the South China Morning Post about the development of the Belt and Road Initiative by China. One of those big articles, great graphics, if you just look up South China Morning Post, Belt Road Initiative, you should be able to come up with the articles. There's about 5 articles that talk about Kyrgyz and Kazakhstan, the largest inland dry port, because they have to change things coming by rail from China to the narrower gauge or the wider gauge that they have in Russia. I think it's a wider gauge. And it's only like, it's like 4 inches, but you can't put rail, you have to change everything over. So they've built this enormous inland dry port. China's building ports along the Arabian Sea, down by Pakistan. And one of the cogs, they have a rail now. China's pushing its rail initiative. You can take goods by rail from China's coast to London. And it takes about 50, is that me? The Siri, did she understand me that time? She never understands me at home. Anyway, so this Belt Road Initiative is China's putting it together, and one of the important cogs in it is part of this agreement. I'll talk again more about it next week. Is railway from that main line that goes up through Russia and Central Asia, and a rail line that goes down to Tehran. You know, Tehran is the second largest city. Metro area is the second largest city in the Middle East. There are probably twice as many people in Tehran as there are in Israel. So process that. A couple interesting things happened over the last couple weeks. This is from Al Monitor. And I think I got my slides out of order. Here's the article that I wanted. Jonathan Spire in the Jerusalem Post. What does Russia's Mideast-related diplomatic activity status signify? Been a lot of things going on with Russia. Russia's trying to project power through diplomacy. Sergei Lavrov, he went to Saudi Arabia and also to the United Arab Emirates. And I think he might have gone to Qatar also to kind of shore up, make Russia look like it's an important military diplomatic power. He then went back to Moscow and he met with a delegation from Hezbollah. Now, this is a very significant development that he would meet with this delegation from Hezbollah. It's only the second time anybody from Hezbollah has ever come to Moscow. And now they're coming. Now, there's a lot of speculation. They've been very coy about what did they discuss. But Hezbollah is a major player. I'll share next week a report that I just found this morning about the threat on the northern border from Hezbollah. And there's people, these think tanks are issuing these reports. It's great, you know, because it helps understand what's going on. But right after Hezbollah was there for a day or two, here comes Gabi Ashkenazi, who's the foreign minister for Israel right now. So there's these things going on. So there's a lot of speculation. What are they talking about? What are they doing? So here's one article in Israel Hayom saying, is Russia working to oust Assad? And I think that's a legitimate question. That's one of the trains of thought that people have, that Russia's tired of being in Syria. They're spending money. Syria needs to be rebuilt. Assad doesn't seem to be cooperating with anybody. That's why they put together the Astana initiative with Turkey, Russia, and Iran to create a constitution for a new Syria, post-war Syria. The only problem is Assad won't cooperate. And I think that in some respects, Putin is sort of throwing support towards other people who will oppose Assad in an upcoming election. So it's a former SDF brigadier general. You also see there's things going on with Turkey's being allowed to, they were bombing Russian-backed groups that Russian-backed, they were bombing their positions the other day. So the problem is that Russia doesn't have the money to pay to rebuild Syria. Europe says, we're not giving you any money to rebuild Syria until you have a stable government in place. And Assad is sort of like, well, you know, I live a pretty good life here in this my enclave that I control in Syria. Things are pretty normal. But over half of the Syrian population from 10 years ago is either out of the country or internally displaced. The Institute for the Study of War has a new thing out about the Syria Situation Report. You can download that at the understandingwar.org website. Here's the key takeaway. The United States and Russia are exerting pressure to limit Iran's military and diplomatic leverage. Now, if Russia is part of this Ezekiel 38 coalition, and they don't have the money to do this, would they look someplace to get the money? That's one of the things you should look at this. The United States conducted several airstrikes targeting Iranian proxies in Abu Kamal, Dar al-Azor province on February 25th, 2021 in response to a series of proxy rocket attacks in Iraq in mid-February. Meanwhile, Russia began several new diplomatic initiatives on behalf of the Assad regime that could diminish Iran's potential economic and political leverage in Syria. So you see what Russia's doing. They're sort of playing it both ways. So whenever this Ezekiel 38 coalition comes together, it's not going to be, hey, we're all brothers and we all love each other. It's going to be a marriage of convenience. Russia facilitated a deal to renew oil trade between the Assad regime and the Syrian Democratic Forces, possibly reducing the Assad regime's reliance on Iranian oil. Iran doesn't like that because that's one of the few places they can sell their oil. But by the way, as part of this deal that they entered into with China, this 25-year deal, that's selling oil to China is one of the big parts of that deal. Russia additionally brokered a prisoner exchange between Israel and Syria, in which Israel also agreed to finance the purchase of Russia's Sputnik COVID vaccine for the Syrian government. Russia led trilateral talks with Turkey and Qatar that could be aimed at cutting Iran out of the peace process. And Hezbollah, in another article, they're saying they're worried that Russia is pushing regime change in Syria and what impact that will have on Hezbollah. And Hezbollah wants to control Lebanon as it does. And Lebanon is a complete, total basket case. So Jonathan Spire, another great analyst that you should read when he writes articles, he said this, but the broader picture of the stark gap between meager resources and self-perception as a major power is the essential reality of Moscow's position in the Middle East. And so you have to ask your question, what would Putin do to change that perception, to get on the other side of this? He has a powerful military, but he doesn't have a ton of money. It means ultimately that Russia must of necessity be reactive and tactical, but that its shrewd tactical moves will then be cloaked in the appearance of great power strategy. The material results of such an approach, when observed closely, are likely to be considerably more modest than they initially appear. Moscow understands the Middle East and plays its games deftly and well, but that is because in many ways it resembles some of its regional partners rather more than it would perhaps readily admit. But, there's the drumbeats of war. Great article in Foreign Affairs about the Palestinian reckoning. They have elections coming up. And I have a suspicion, France has elections coming up. And my suspicion is we're going to see this division that we see in Israel, in the United States. Palestinian elections, they don't think anybody would win. So Abbas would continue serving. I think he's in the 16th year of his 4-year term. So he would continue on. But this is a good article on Foreign Affairs. Not necessarily the place you would expect it, but it says the Palestinians have issues. The Arabs have kind of moved on. They don't support them anymore. They've been carved out. Oh, Iran, Seth tweeted this morning. Iran, he said, hey, listen, we can be an alternative to the Suez after that ship is stuck. We have rail system here in Tehran and access to pipelines that go into Europe or across Turkey. This article from the media line, Northern Syria caught between Turkey's hammer, Russian anvil, and an imperialist structure. So this is another article that talks about the fact that as one analyst says, I think this all looks a bit like the Turks trying to use this moment when there isn't yet a real serious U.S. strategy towards Syria and under the Biden administration to consolidate gains, to eliminate opposition, and to solidify their position in the north of the country. And again, this is a map that was tweeted by the communications director of the Erdogan regime. You can see how Turkey wants a big chunk of Syria and Iraq. That's how they view things. They actually want all of what the Ottoman Empire had, including Jerusalem, Mecca, and Medina. Great article you should read. I'm pretty much close with this. Gatestone Institute. Title of the article is Erdoganistan, the new Islamic superpower. It's some of the topics that I talked about last week. They're changing the textbooks. The reports out of Syria this morning, or out of Turkey over the last 24 hours, is that Erdogan has arrested hundreds of people in the military at high levels, put them in prison because they have been communicating with or receiving information from a Gulen, Fethullah Gulen, who is the rival of Erdogan. He's probably more feeble than Joe Biden. He's in his 90s now, I believe. He lives in the Poconos. But he, by the way, set up a series of schools in the United States to teach Turkish students. Well, he's an Islamist like Erdogan, but he also is teaching them science and technology. And Erdogan says in this article, quotes of him as, listen, we view Turkey as not the 80 million, 90 million people that live in Turkey. We view it as from Gibraltar to Kazakhstan, to the Great Wall of China. That's the Turkish empire that should be. So all of that is quite interesting. And then, of course, this relates to the Chinese deal with Iran. The Chinese foreign minister actually came to Iran. He didn't make fun of them like they did with our Secretary of State. So it's a, look, very volatile world. I'm not sure I'm ready to say the world is on a trigger edge, but the economy is on I think, a hair trigger. We have just pumped way too much money into the economy. Fake money. The United States is by far the biggest debtor nation in the world in terms of dollars. Relative to the economy, it's not the biggest one, but China has a huge debt load. I mean, it seems like everybody's trying to get things to change. It is really what I'll be talking about when I do my talk for the Canadian conference. It'll be broadcast at the end of April, Last Days Bible Conference, the Great Reset. I mean, they're working at this on multiple levels. But listen, God's in control. And Jesus is coming back. So what else can I say? Stay in the Word. Stay in prayer, because those are vital things to do in this day and age. Let's pray. Father, Lord, just pray you'll give us the power to stand in this day and age, that you'll give us opportunities to share the gospel of Jesus Christ with those around us, and that we will continue occupying until you come. Bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.